The boy's voice hit the diner like a fist through glass. "Stop. Don't touch him." Nobody moved. Not the waitress with the coffee pot frozen halfway to a mug. Not the trucker in the corner booth who'd been mid-bite. Not the two enforcers flanking the door with their hands already drifting toward their waistbands. Nobody. Because the voice, small, high, and completely unafraid, had come from a child. He couldn't have been older than 6. Maybe 6.5 if you were being generous. He was standing on the red vinyl seat of the booth closest to the window, one sneaker planted on the cushion and the other on the edge of the table, and his arm was extended out straight in front of him, pointing directly at the man the rest of the room had spent the last 40 seconds trying very hard not to look at. Kale Dravik, the most feared alpha in the entire East Coast syndicate. The man who had walked into Rosie's Route 66 diner 17 minutes ago with 12 enforcers, for armored vehicles, and the kind of silence that follows someone who has never once in his adult life been told no. Kale hadn't looked at the boy right away. He'd been looking at the manager. Asking, and asking was a generous word for what Kale Dravik did, whether the back storage room had been accessed in the last 48 hours by anyone outside the regular staff. That was the job. Surveillance had flagged this location. His brother Ryvan had confirmed the flag 2 nights ago. Someone in a rival pack, the Ashcroft crew out of Baltimore, had been using small civilian locations like this one as drop points, passing intel through kitchen staff, using innocent people as cover. Kale didn't like that. He especially didn't like it when the location was 40 miles from the syndicate's eastern border. So he came himself. Because when Kale Dravik showed up somewhere, the truth showed up with him. He didn't have a choice. He'd been 3 sentences into his conversation with the manager when the boy spoke. And now every single person in that diner was waiting to see what Kale Dravik would do to a 6-year-old who had just interrupted him. Kale turned. Slowly. The way a mountain turns. Not quickly, not dramatically, just with the full understanding that it doesn't need to hurry. He looked at the boy. The boy looked back. Big brown eyes. Serious as a courtroom. A smear of ketchup on his left cheek that nobody had wiped off yet. A navy blue hoodie that was slightly too big, the sleeves bunched at his wrists. His arm was still extended, still pointing, not at Kale's face, at his chest. More specifically, at the place where Kale's shirt had fallen open at the collar. 3 buttons undone. Because Kale Dravik did not dress for other people's comfort. And right there, on the upper left side of his chest, disappearing beneath the fabric, the ink, black and deep crimson, geometric, ancient-looking, the triple mark sigil. Hi viewers, have you ever had a moment where a complete stranger said something so specific, so impossible, that it stopped you cold? Drop your story in the comments. I want to read every single one. Kale's enforcers had not relaxed. If anything, the air in the room had gotten tighter. Because confused alphas were predictable. Interrupted alphas were not. But Kale's eyes had not moved from the boy. You can't hurt him. The child's voice was steadier now. Like he'd decided something right before he opened his mouth and wasn't going back on it. My dad said men with tattoos like yours protect people. They don't scare them. The woman beside the boy grabbed his arm. She was young. Maybe mid-20s. Dark skin, natural hair pulled back, a yellow apron over plain clothes. Her eyes were wide and fixed on Kale with the specific kind of fear that comes not from stupidity but from knowing exactly who she was looking at. I am so sorry, she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. He doesn't. He's just a child. He doesn't understand. Kale raised one hand. She stopped. Let him speak. He said it quietly. He always spoke quietly. The room still heard every word. The boy, unimpressed by fear, apparently immune to the atmosphere that had made grown men leave rooms rather than stay in them, lowered his arm. He looked at Kale the way a child looks at a puzzle he's already halfway solved. My dad had the same mark, the boy said. Right here. He pressed 2 fingers to his own chest, just below his collarbone on the left side. Exact placement. He said it meant something. He said it was for family. Cale's jaw tightened. The triple mark sigil was not a tattoo. It was not chosen. It was not designed by a parlor artist or picked from a wall of flash prints. It appeared on the skin of Dravic bloodline males at birth. Faint at first, darkening over years, fully set by the time an alpha reached dominance. It was genetic. It was internal. It was the kind of thing that syndicate historians had spent generations trying to explain and had mostly given up on. No outsider knew what it meant. No outsider should have been able to identify it from across a diner. And yet, Cale said. It wasn't a question. But the way he said it made it feel like a door opening. The boy's expression shifted just a fraction. Something careful moved through his eyes. Old grief in a young face. He's gone, the boy said. He disappeared before I could remember what he looked like. A pause. The coffee pot was still frozen in the air. Then the boy said quieter, almost to himself, "But he smelled like you." The diner didn't move. Cale didn't move. Because scent recognition wasn't something children invented. It wasn't a game or a story or a bid for attention. Scent was biological. Scent was blood calling to blood across distance and time. And something in Cale's chest, something he would not have admitted to anyone in that room, cracked. Just slightly. Just enough. His brother Ryvan appeared at his left shoulder. Ryvan never announced himself. He simply materialized when the situation required him. 6'4", built like consequence, eyes that never stopped moving. He leaned close to Cale's ear. "We've got movement on the perimeter. 3 vehicles. Ashcroft plates." The ambush had arrived. Cale didn't look away from the boy. "Get everyone in the back," he said low. Now, the enforcers moved. The diner staff scattered. The trucker in the corner booth didn't need to be told twice. Cale took one step toward the child. The woman, the guardian, pulled the boy behind her. Instinct. Understandable. "What is your name?" Cale asked. Not the woman. The boy. The child pushed around the guardian's arm and looked up at Cale with those serious, steady eyes. "Caius," he said. "Caius Vale." The name hit Cale somewhere behind the sternum. Vale. Outside, the first vehicle screeched to a stop on the gravel lot. Cale looked at Ryvan. One look. That was all it took between them. Soren, their strategist, was already on the phone in the corner, voice clipped and calm in the way that meant he was already 20 moves ahead of everyone else in the room. Cale looked back at the boy. Caius Vale. Vale. The windows blew in. Glass exploded across the floor in a shower of glittering fragments. The first shot hadn't been aimed at anyone. It was a warning. A signal. The Ashcroft crew didn't come to talk. Cale moved. Not toward the door. Not toward his enforcers. He moved toward the child. He grabbed Caius with one arm, firm, careful, nothing like the violence the rest of his body was built for, and pulled him down behind the overturned booth. The guardian dropped beside them without being told. Her hands over her head, her breath coming fast. Caius did not cry. He pressed his face against Cale's shoulder and held on. And Cale, who had not held a child in his arms since he was himself a child, felt something ancient and furious wake up in his chest. Because Vale was a name he knew. Vale was a name that should have died 7 years ago. Vale was the name of the 4th triplet. The one they buried. The one who was never supposed to have had a son. The shooting outside intensified. Ryvan's voice cut through the chaos. Coordinating, directing, lethal in its efficiency. Soren was already moving the civilian staff through the kitchen exit. This was what the syndicate did. They contained. They controlled. But Cale was not moving. He was kneeling behind a blown-out diner booth with a child who smelled like blood and held on like he'd been waiting his whole short life for something solid to grab. "Are you scared?" Caius asked. His voice was muffled against Cale's jacket. Cale looked down at him. No, he said. Good, Caius said. My dad said men with your mark don't run. Cale's grip on the boy tightened. Because if Caius Vale was telling the truth, if even a fraction of what his presence implied was real, then this child was not a stranger. This child was the last piece of something Cale thought he'd lost forever. The back door of the diner swung open. An enforcer's signal, the convoy was in position. The exit window was 30 seconds, maybe less. Cale stood with the boy still in his arms. He looked at the guardian. You come with us, he said. She stared at him. That is not a request. Caius lifted his head from Cale's shoulder and looked at him with those impossible, ancient eyes. Are you my dad's brother? He asked. Cale said nothing. Not yet. Because if he answered that question, if he said yes out loud and made it real, everything that came next would be war. He carried the boy out the back door and into the armored night. And somewhere in the chaos, in the gravel and the broken glass and the distant sound of sirens closing in from 3 directions, Caius Vale reached up and touched the mark on Cale's chest, right where his father's had been, and did not let go. What Cale did not know yet, what none of them knew, was that 2 miles away, in a storage unit registered under a name none of them recognized, a phone had just received a signal, and it was still active. The convoy moved fast and quiet through the dark. 3 armored vehicles. No lights beyond what the highway required. The kind of travel that didn't leave records. Caius Vale sat in the back seat of the middle vehicle with his seatbelt on. Because Cale had put it on him without a word and the boy had let him, which was its own kind of statement, and watched the trees blur past the tinted window like he was trying to memorize them. The guardian sat beside him. Her name was Nearest Ashby. Cale's enforcer Briggs had confirmed it from the ID in her bag before she'd even realized her bag was being checked. She hadn't protested. She just watched the process with the quiet, careful eyes of someone who had learned a long time ago that protesting certain things cost more than it gained. She held Caius's hand in her lap and did not let go. Cale sat in the front passenger seat. Riven drove. Soren was in the 3rd vehicle, working the phones, already pulling every thread he could find attached to the name Draxon Vale. They hadn't spoken since the diner. That wasn't unusual for the triplets. They had spent enough years operating in tandem that silence between them was not empty. It was loaded. It meant they were all thinking the same thing and none of them were ready to say it yet. Riven broke it first. Vale is a dead name, he said. Low, flat, informational. Apparently not, Cale said. A beat. I pulled the file 2 years ago, Riven said. When we did the succession audit. Draxon Dravik Vale. Declared deceased. 7 years back. No body recovered. Council signed off on the closure. I remember. The mark doesn't pass to illegitimate children. I know what the mark does. Then you know what it means that the boy has it. Cale turned to look at his brother. Riven's eyes stayed on the road. I didn't say he had it, Cale said carefully. You didn't have to. You saw his placement. You know where he pointed. Cale turned back to face forward. He did know. Caius hadn't pointed at Cale's tattoo the way a child points at something interesting or unfamiliar. He'd pointed with recognition. Muscle memory almost, the kind of gesture you make when you've seen something before and your body knows it before your brain does. And the placement. The exact placement he'd pressed to his own chest. Left side. Just below the collarbone. Where the mark sat on every Dravik male since records began. Cale exhaled through his nose. Who is she? He asked, tilting his head slightly toward the back seat without turning. Riven already had the answer because Riven always had the answer. Nearest Ashby. 24. Born in Savannah. Relocated to this area 3 years ago. No pack affiliation on record. Works part-time at a textile warehouse in the next county. No criminal history. No syndicate flags. A pause. Clean. Too clean, maybe. What does that mean? It means for someone who's been raising the possible heir to a dead Dravic bloodline for what looks like 3 years. She has done an exceptional job of not existing. Kale processed that. Someone had taught her how to disappear. How to live small, stay quiet, leave no trail. That wasn't something most people knew how to do by instinct. That was taught. That was protection strategy. Someone had prepared her for this. The question was who? From the back seat, Caius's voice came through the dark. Where are we going? Kale looked in the visor mirror. The boy was still watching the trees, but his eyes had moved. They were looking at the mirror now. Looking at Kale. Somewhere safe, Kale said. Caius considered this. Is it far? No. Will there be food? We didn't finish dinner. Riven made a sound. Not quite a laugh. Close. Kale said, there will be food. Caius nodded, satisfied, and went back to watching the trees. Nearest was watching Kale in the mirror. When he caught her eyes, she didn't look away. She was afraid, he could feel it, but she was not a person who let fear make her look small. There was a steadiness in her that he noted. Filed. How long have you been with him? Kale asked, still watching her in the mirror. She hesitated for exactly 1 second. Since he was 3, she said. And before that? Another pause. Longer this time. He was with someone else, she said carefully. Who? Her jaw shifted. Someone who asked me to take over when they couldn't continue. Kale turned in his seat to look at her directly. I'm going to need more than that. Nearest held his gaze. In the low light of the moving vehicle, with the weight of everything the last hour had dropped on all of them, she looked like someone standing at the edge of something she'd been dreading for a long time. I know, she said. I need to know he's safe first, before I say anything else. I need to know you're not going to use him. The word used landed between them. Kale studied her for a moment. He is Dravic blood, Kale said. If that mark is what I think it is, he is the only living descendant of our 4th line. No one in the syndicate, not me, not my brothers, not the council, uses their own blood. Nearest's throat moved. Draxon said something like that once, she said quietly. Before everything went wrong. The inside of the vehicle went very still. Riven's hands were steady on the wheel, but Kale saw his knuckles tighten. You knew Draxon Vale, Kale said. It was not a question. Nearest nodded. He trusted you, Kale said. She nodded again, slower this time. He trusted me with the most important thing he had, she said. And he left a letter and told me never to open it unless I found the mark. Every hair on Kale's arms stood up. And have you opened it? Kale asked. Nearest reached into the inner pocket of her jacket and pulled out an envelope. It was old. The paper had yellowed at the edges. The seal, dark red wax pressed with a sigil, was still intact. Still unbroken. Kale looked at the seal. The triple mark sigil. In wax. Pressed by a hand that was supposed to be 7 years in the ground. He told me to give it to whoever the boy recognized, Nearest said softly. He said the boy would know. He said the blood always knows. Kale reached out and took the envelope. He did not open it. Not yet, because his name was written on the outside. Not Kale Dravic. Not the syndicate. Not the council. His name. In handwriting he recognized. In handwriting he had not seen in 7 years. The convoy turned off the highway onto the private access road that led to the syndicate's eastern safehouse. Gravel crunched beneath the tires. The tree line thickened. Soren's voice crackled over the earpiece. We've got a secondary flag, Soren said. The storage unit registered 2 miles from the diner. It just pinged active 30 minutes ago. Someone accessed it remotely. Kale stared at the envelope in his hand. Pull everything on that unit, he said. Already running it. A pause. Kale, What? The registration name on the unit. A beat. It's listed under Draxon Vale. The safe house had 7 rooms, 3 exits, and no neighbors within a half-mile in any direction. It was not comfortable. It was not designed to be. It was designed for function, clean sight lines, reinforced doors, a generator that could run silent for 48 hours. The kind of place you went when the world outside had become too loud and too armed to think clearly. Caius explored it like it was Christmas morning. He moved from room to room with his sneakers squeaking on the hardwood floors, touching things lightly. A lamp, a bookshelf, the back of a leather chair. The way children touch new environments. Mapping. Learning. His face was calm the entire time, and it was that calm that unsettled the 4 enforcers stationed inside more than anything else about the evening. They'd expected a frightened child. They'd gotten something else entirely. Nearest had stayed close to him through the first hour, a shadow, quiet and watchful. And then, once she'd confirmed the exits and accepted a glass of water she barely drank, she'd let Caius wander while she sat at the kitchen table with her hands wrapped around the glass and said nothing. Cale's brothers came to him separately, the way they always did when something was big enough that it needed separate thinking before collective discussion. Riven came first. He leaned against the doorframe of the back room where Cale had gone to be still, and crossed his arms and said, "You haven't opened it." Cale was sitting at the edge of the table with the envelope in front of him. He'd been sitting like that for 20 minutes. "No," Cale said. "Why?" Cale didn't answer immediately. Why was a complicated question. He had not been a person who struggled with action. He moved. He decided. He executed. That was the architecture of who he was. It was why the council had given him command authority at 26 and why the syndicate's enemies had spent the better part of a decade learning to reroute their operations around his territory rather than contest it directly. He was not someone who sat with envelopes. But this was Draxon's handwriting. And Draxon was dead. Or had been. Or had let them believe he was. And those were 3 very different things. Because once I open it, Cale said finally, everything after that is going to move very fast. And I want 1 more minute where I'm still operating on what I know instead of what I'm about to find out. Riven was quiet for a moment. Then, the storage unit came back registered to a legal entity. Shell company. 3 layers deep, but Soren cracked it inside 40 minutes. He paused. The underlying entity traces to a financial account that was opened 6 years ago, funded by a single wire transfer from a numbered offshore account. What account? That's the part you need to sit with, Riven said. The origin account was under our father's name. Cale looked up. Riven's face was doing nothing, deliberately, specifically nothing, in the way it did when he'd already processed something difficult and was waiting for someone else to catch up. Vasil Dravik, Cale said flatly. Dead 9 years. And yet, Riven agreed. Cale picked up the envelope. He broke the seal. The wax cracked cleanly, the way old wax does when it's been kept dry and undisturbed. Inside was a single sheet of paper folded twice. The handwriting was Draxon's. Cale would have known it anywhere, in any lighting, under any condition. He'd grown up reading it. Notes passed in council meetings. Arguments scrawled in the margins of strategy documents. Birthday messages that were always slightly too short and slightly too sincere, because Draxon had never been good at finding the middle. He read it once fast, then again slower. Then he set it flat on the table and pressed both palms against the surface and breathed. Cale, Riven said. He's alive, Cale said. Riven exhaled. The letter says he's been in a protective hold since year 2. He faked the death himself. Dad helped him. They found out someone inside the syndicate had marked him for removal. Not the council, someone underneath it. Someone who wanted the 4th bloodline gone before it could produce an heir. Who? He doesn't name them. He says he didn't know who, only that it was inside our infrastructure. He says he went under before he could confirm. A pause. He says the boy was already born when he made the call. Caius was 8 months old. He left him with a syndicate-adjacent Omega he trusted. Not Nereus, someone before her, and he built the storage unit as a dead drop for exactly this situation. What situation? Cale looked at his brother. If the boy ever found the mark on his own, if the blood recognized blood without anyone telling it to, he said that would be the signal that it was time to move. Riven was very still. He was waiting, Riven said. He's been waiting 6 years, Cale said. The door opened. Soren entered without knocking. None of them knocked on each other. And he was already talking before he was fully in the room. I pulled the photo archive from the secure syndicate server. The internal records from the period before Draxon went under. He set a tablet on the table in front of Cale. Look at the bottom right image. Cale looked. It was a surveillance still. Low resolution, clearly pulled from an internal camera, the kind the syndicate used for its own facility monitoring. A corridor shot. 2 men standing close together, their conversation clearly private. One of the men was their father, Vasil Dravik. The other man's face was half turned away from the camera, but the angle of his jaw, the set of his shoulders, the particular way he held himself in a position of absolute confidence despite clearly not being the most powerful person in the frame. Cale recognized him. He should not have been in that corridor. He should not have been in that building at all. He was not syndicate. He had no clearance. He had no legitimate reason to be standing in a private hallway with Vasil Dravik 3 months before Draxon went under. Is this what I think it is? Cale said. It gets worse, Soren said. He scrolled the image. Check the timestamp. Cale checked. The photo was dated 14 days before Draxon Vale's official death declaration. Riven looked at Soren. Soren looked at Cale. Someone inside the infrastructure coordinated it, Soren said. The removal order. This man arranged access. Dad found out after the fact. That's why he built the financial trail. As insurance. As proof. Why didn't he come to us? Cale said. Because he died 4 months after this photo was taken, Soren said quietly. He ran out of time. The room held that. 9 years. Their father had been sitting on a secret that had fractured the Dravik line into pieces. 1 brother underground. 1 bloodline hidden in plain sight. 1 enemy still inside their walls. And then he died, and left breadcrumbs so small it had taken a 6-year-old boy pointing at a mark in a roadside diner to start pulling the thread. From down the hall a sound. Small sneakers on hardwood floors. Caius still exploring. Cale stood and walked out of the back room and into the hallway. Caius was in the corridor, crouched down, looking at something on the baseboard. He straightened when Cale appeared, and then he held up a small photograph. Old, printed on actual photo paper, the kind that had started going obsolete before the boy was born. I found this, Caius said. It was behind the bookshelf. He held it out. Cale took it. It was a photograph of 4 young men. Late teens, maybe 20. Standing in front of a building Cale recognized immediately, the old Dravik estate. Before the fire. Before they moved operations east. For men. He recognized 3 of them immediately. Himself, Riven, Soren, and their second from the left, arm around Cale's shoulder, grinning with his whole face in the way none of the others ever quite managed, Draxon. Caius looked up at Cale. That's my dad, he said. He pointed at the second man with total certainty. Right there. I know because of the picture Nereus has. The one she keeps in the blue tin. Cale looked at the boy. You've never met him, Cale said. No, Caius said. But she showed me his face. So I'd know him. A pause. She said if I ever saw someone who looked like him or smelled like him or had his mark, I should say something. Everything in Cale's chest rearranged itself. She told you to look, he said. She said I'd know. Caius said simply. And I did. Soon as you walked in. Cale crouched down to the boy's level. Up close, Caius's face was a document. Draxon's jaw. Their mother's eyes. Deep-set, dark, watching everything. The particular set of the brow that every Dravic male had inherited from a grandfather none of them had met. Blood. Undeniable. Your father, Cale said carefully, may not be as gone as we thought. Caius stared at him. I know, the boy said. Cale went very still. What do you mean, you know? Caius reached into the front pocket of his hoodie and pulled out something small. A folded piece of paper, worn soft at the creases from being opened and closed many times. He unfolded it with the careful hands of someone who understood it was important. It was a hand-drawn map. Simple lines, a building shape, a road, an X. At the bottom, in handwriting that matched the letter in Cale's back pocket exactly, 3 words. When you're ready. Asterisk. Cale looked at the map, then at the boy. Caius held his gaze with those ancient, serious eyes. He gave that to Nereus when I was a baby, Caius said. She let me carry it when I was old enough not to lose it. She said I'd know when to show someone. Cale took the map from the boy's hands. His fingers were not entirely steady. Are you ready? Caius asked. Cale stood. He walked back to the room where his brothers were waiting. He set the map on the table next to the photograph and the broken envelope and the image of the man who should not have been in that hallway. Soren looked at the map, then at Cale. That's 40 minutes from here, Soren said. I know, Cale said. Riven was already reaching for his jacket. And somewhere in the dark 40 minutes away, in a location marked by a dead man's handwriting on a piece of paper carried by a child who had never been told to be afraid, something was waiting. They left before dawn. 2 vehicles this time. No convoy. No visible force. Just Cale, Riven, Soren, and 2 of Riven's most trusted men in the follow car. The enforcers at the safe house had orders. Guard the property, guard Nereus and Caius, and contact Cale only if something moved. Caius had been asleep when they left. He'd fallen asleep sitting upright on the leather couch in the main room, shoes still on, one hand curled beside his face. Nereus had covered him with a blanket from the hall closet and then looked at Cale with eyes that said 1,000 things she hadn't yet said out loud. We'll be back by morning, Cale told her. She'd nodded. Then, quietly, before he turned to go. He's waited a long time for this. Don't let it be for nothing. Cale had not answered that. He wasn't sure he could. The drive was 41 minutes on empty roads with the sky going from black to deep blue at the edges, and no one in the vehicle spoke much. The triplets had always been like that before an approach, conserving something, not energy exactly, more like the specific kind of focus that can be diluted by words. Soren navigated. Riven drove. Cale watched the road and turned the map over in his hands and thought about Draxon. Draxon, who had been the loudest of the 4 of them and the only one who could make their father laugh without trying. Draxon, who had been declared dead in a council session that Cale had sat through in a suit and had not cried at because he had believed it. Had believed it completely, had grieved it completely, had then spent the better part of a year restructuring his approach to everything because losing a brother rewired you, whether you acknowledged that or not. Draxon, who had apparently been alive the entire time, who had a son, who had been waiting. The map led them off the main road and down a county route that narrowed into a 2-lane and then effectively stopped being a road and started being more of a suggestion. Trees thickened on both sides. The headlights cut forward and found only more dark. Then a structure. Low. Concrete. Industrial in the way that things built for privacy rather than aesthetics tend to be. No signage. No lighting. A chain-link fence around the perimeter, padlocked, with a secondary interior gate that suggested the fence was more of a first-layer deterrent than real security. The real security would be inside. Cale got out of the vehicle. He stood at the fence and looked at the building and felt nothing familiar about it except the tension in his own chest. Riven appeared beside him. "Trip sensors," Riven said quietly. "3 perimeter. We've already triggered the outermost one." "Good," Kale said. "Because if Draxen was here, if this was real and not a trap and not a ghost story and not some elaborate manipulation built on a child who'd been fed lines his entire life, then Draxen would already know they were on the approach. And he would decide what happened next." Kale waited. 40 seconds. The interior gate clicked. Not from their side. From inside. Someone had released the magnetic lock remotely. The gate swung inward 3 inches and stopped, held by its own weight. An invitation. Controlled. Kale pushed it open and walked through. The building's front door was reinforced steel, the kind with no exterior handle. You needed to be buzzed in or have the interior code. But it was already ajar. 3 inches, just like the gate. He pushed it open. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of concrete and something else. Something that Kale's body registered before his mind did. Something that made the back of his neck tighten in a way that was not threat response. It was recognition. The building's interior was split. One half was clearly operational. Equipment. Monitors. A communications array that suggested serious, ongoing investment. The kind of setup you built when you intended to stay somewhere for years, not days. The other half was more personal. A cot. A table. Photographs pinned to a corkboard above the table. A shelf of books that looked read and reread. A coffee mug with the East Coast Syndicate's old crest on it, the logo they'd retired 8 years ago, before Draxen went under, which meant he'd had it since before. On the table, a laptop. Open. Screen on. Kale walked to the table. On the screen, a live feed. The safe house. Their safe house, 40 minutes away. The interior camera. The main room. Kale could see Caius asleep on the couch. Blanket pulled up to his chin. His hands contracted. "He's been watching," Riven said from behind him. "The whole time," Soren said quietly. A door opened in the back wall of the building. A man stepped out. He was taller than Kale remembered. Leaner. 7 years of whatever this life had required of him was written in the geography of his face. Sharper at the jaw, deeper at the eyes. A scar along his left temple that hadn't been there before. He was wearing plain clothes. Dark jeans. A gray shirt. Nothing that announced anything. But the mark was there. Left side of the chest. Triple mark sigil. Dark and fully set the way it got on a Dravik male at full dominance. Draxen Vale. The 4th triplet. The one they buried. Standing 12 feet away in a concrete building in the pre-dawn dark. Looking at all 3 of them with an expression that was trying very hard to be controlled and not quite managing it. "You're late," Draxen said. His voice was the same. That was the thing that hit Kale hardest. The voice was exactly the same. Riven made a sound low in his throat. Soren turned away for a moment. Not long, just long enough. Kale crossed the room in 4 steps and grabbed his brother by the front of the shirt and pulled him in, and Draxen's arms came up and around, and for a moment in the cold and the concrete and the dark, the 4 of them, or 3 of them, the 4th trying to hold himself together across the room, were just brothers again. Then Kale stepped back. His hands were still on Draxen's shoulders. He looked at his brother's face for a long moment. "You have a son," Kale said. Draxen's throat moved. "I know." He walked into a diner and stopped the most dangerous meeting I've had in 6 months by pointing at my chest and telling me his father had my mark. Something moved across Draxen's face. Pride, grief, relief. Too many things at once to separate. "That's my boy," he said softly. "He's been carrying your map for 3 years," Kale said. Nearest let him carry it when she thought he was old enough not to lose it. Draxen closed his eyes for 1 second. Is he stopped. Started again. "Is he okay? Is he?" "He's asleep on a leather couch with his shoes on," Kale said. And he is the most fearless person I have met in recent memory. Draxen exhaled. It was not a small sound. Riven stepped forward. There's a lot we need to go through, he said. Not cold. Not accusing. Just real. The letter. The storage unit. The photograph of the man in Dad's corridor. Draxen's eyes sharpened. You found the photo. Soren cracked the financial trail in 40 minutes. Draxen looked at Soren with something complicated. I knew he would, Draxen said. Eventually. I needed enough time for Caius to get old enough to carry this. Who is the man in the photograph? Soren asked. Draxen walked back to the table. He pulled a physical file from underneath the laptop. Thick, paper-clipped, annotated in his handwriting in the margins. He set it on the table and opened it to a page near the middle. Printed photograph. Clearer than the surveillance still. Same man. Full face visible this time. Cale looked at it. The name was printed beneath the image. Cale recognized the face before he read the name. And the name was one that should have been impossible. Because this man was not a syndicate outsider. He was syndicate infrastructure. He attended the quarterly council sessions. He had attended Draxen's memorial. He had stood beside Cale at the graveside ceremony and shook his hand and said the words people say when someone is gone. He sat at the funeral, Cale said. I know, Draxen said. He shook my hand. I know that too. Cale set the file down. The room was very quiet. Tell me everything, Cale said. Draxen pulled a chair from the table and sat down. And outside, in the gray first light pressing against the concrete walls, a vehicle turned onto the county road 2 miles out. It was not one of theirs. And it was moving fast. Devra Ose's voice came through the earpiece at 5:47 in the morning. She was syndicate intelligence. Old school. 32 years in the infrastructure, the kind of operative who had survived 4 different leadership transitions by being indispensable in a way that had nothing to do with loyalty and everything to do with information. She called Soren, not Cale. She always called Soren. 2 vehicles. County route. Moving at approach speed. They're not yours. A pause. I flagged the plates 20 minutes ago, and I've been trying to figure out how they knew. How did they know? Soren said. Storage unit ping, Devra said. When you accessed it remotely from the safe house. Someone else had a passive monitor on the unit's network address. They rode the ping back to your location. Soren was already moving toward Draxen. Who's monitoring? That's the part you're not going to like, Devra said. The monitor was placed 18 months ago, from inside the council's own server infrastructure. Soren lowered the earpiece from his mouth. We have 4 minutes, he said to the room. Draxen was already on his feet. 7 years had not slowed him down. If anything, they'd done the opposite. Stripped everything non-essential away and left something leaner and more focused. He moved to the far wall and pressed a panel that swung. There's a tunnel exit in the back, Draxen said. Comes up a 1/4 mile east into the tree line. One of yours can circle. You ran for 7 years, Cale said. It wasn't accusation. It was statement. That's done. Draxen looked at him. Riven had already moved to the front of the building, checking the approach sight lines. 2 men on the windows. Soren coordinating with the follow car, repositioning them to cover the eastern approach. Draxen looked at Cale for a long moment. Then something in his shoulders dropped. Not defeat, not surrender. Release. The specific release of someone who has been carrying a posture for so long they've forgotten what it felt like without it. Okay, he said. Okay. Sit back down, Cale said. Tell me who I'm looking at when those doors open. Draxen sat. His name is Aldrich Pruitt, Draxen said. He's been running counter-operations inside the syndicate for 11 years. Long before we ever identified him. He recruited from within low-level first, people with grievances, people with debt. Grew it slowly. The goal was never to take over the syndicate from the outside. He looked at Kale. The goal was to hollow it out from the inside. Remove the bloodlines that couldn't be bought. Replace them with people who could. The fourth bloodline, Kale said. It was first on the list, Draxon said. I found a document, a priority sequence. Names, bloodlines, the order in which they were meant to be removed. He opened the file again to a page near the back. My name was third on the list. Who was first? Soren asked from across the room. Draxon looked up. Dad, he said quietly. His name was first. The silence that followed that was a specific kind of silence. The kind that confirms a fear you'd been pushing back for a long time without wanting to examine it directly. Vasil Dravik had not died of natural causes. Kale had always known that, in the part of himself that he kept walled off from operational function. He'd known it the way you know something you cannot afford to act on until you have certainty, and certainty had been 9 years in arriving. It was here now. First and second, Riven said from the window. His voice was controlled. Vehicles stopped at the fence. For men out. 2 staying with the cars. He watched. They know how to move. Pruitt's crew is professional, Draxon said. He doesn't use amateurs. Neither do we, Riven said. The approach would take them 2 minutes from the fence to the door. 1 minute 50 seconds now. Kale looked at the file on the table. At the photograph of Aldrich Pruitt, council attendee, memorial guest, handshake giver at a grave that held no one. He doesn't know we've had this conversation, Kale said. No, Draxon said. He thinks he's walking in on a discovery in progress. Thinks we've just arrived. That's the assumption, yes. Kale thought for 3 seconds. Then we use it, he said. We give him the scene he expects. Draxon's eyes narrowed. What scene? Brothers. Reunion. Emotion. He thinks we're off balance. Kale straightened. Let him think that. Riven turned from the window and looked at Kale with the expression that meant he'd already run the same calculation and arrived at the same answer. Soren ended the call with Devra and pocketed his phone. Follow car is east, Soren said. On signal. The file goes in the tunnel room, Kale said to Draxon. Everything physical. Out of sight. Draxon nodded and moved. 1 minute. The front door opened. Aldrich Pruitt was not a large man. That was always the first thing Kale noticed about him in council sessions. How unremarkable his physical presence was. Medium height. Neat clothes. A face that read as pleasant and forgettable in the way that some faces are specifically cultivated to be. He walked in with 2 of his men flanking him and stopped when he saw the triplets. His expression shifted. It was fast. A fraction of a second. But Kale had spent his entire adult life reading rooms and reading people, and he caught it. Pruitt had not expected all 3 of them. He'd expected 1, maybe 2. A fractured response, brothers arriving at different times, emotional disarray. He'd gotten the Dravik triplets standing in formation in a concrete room at 6 in the morning, and the math on that was different from what he'd planned for. Kale, Pruitt said. His voice was warm, practiced. I got Devra's alert. I came as fast as I could. What are we looking at? This man was good. If Kale didn't know, he wouldn't know. We're looking at a lot of things, Kale said. Come in. Pruitt took 3 steps forward. His eyes moved around the room, taking inventory. Looking for the obvious things, the file, the laptop, any evidence of how much they'd found and how fast. The file was in the tunnel room. The laptop screen had been darkened. What he saw was 3 men in a stripped-down operational space. Tense. Uncertain. Exactly what he'd expect from brothers who had just received the first confirmation that their dead 4th brother might not be as dead as advertised. The unit pinged, Pruitt said carefully. If Draxon Vale set this location up, we need to move fast. We need to contain whatever's here before. Before what? Soren said mildly. Pruitt looked at him. Before it becomes a security issue, Pruitt said smoothly. If there's sensitive material here, material that belonged to a bloodline that was officially closed, why would a closed bloodline be a security issue? Riven said from near the window. Pruitt glanced at him. Political exposure, Pruitt said. If it comes out that a Dravik brother faked a death, the council will. The council will what? The voice came from the back of the room. Pruitt turned. Draxon Vale stood in the doorway of the secondary room. And Aldrich Pruitt's face, practiced, pleasant, impeccable, did something it was clearly not supposed to do. It went white. In that moment, every mask Pruitt had spent 11 years building slipped. Just for a second. Just long enough. Kale saw it. So did Riven. So did Soren. Draxon looked at Pruitt with a stillness that was nothing like peace. 11 years, Draxon said. I've been sitting 40 minutes from the council building for 11 months. Waiting for exactly this. Pruitt's men shifted. But Riven's men were already in position. This was the calculation. This was why they hadn't run. You can't prosecute a ghost. You can't expose a man inside your own infrastructure without evidence and witnesses and a moment of undeniable, visible guilt that cannot later be walked back. This was the moment. Pruitt looked at Kale. You can't prove anything, he said. The warmth was gone from his voice entirely. The photograph from Dad's corridor, Kale said. The financial trail through the shell company. The priority sequence document with my father's name at the top. He paused. And 11 years of a man who was supposed to be dead, watching and recording and building a case from 40 minutes away. Pruitt's jaw tightened. This isn't over, he said quietly. No, Kale agreed. It's not. Because this moment, this room, this confrontation was not the end of anything. It was the beginning of something much larger. And somewhere 40 minutes away, in a safe house with 7 rooms and 3 exits, a 6-year-old boy was waking up on a leather couch with his shoes still on, and reaching for the blanket, and asking Nearest in a sleep-rough voice if they were coming back. Kale's earpiece clicked. Soren's voice. Quiet. Urgent. The file, Soren said. What about it? There's a... Caius is on it, Soren said. His name is on the new sequence. Kale's eyes moved to Pruitt. Pruitt was watching him. And behind the practiced blankness of Pruitt's face, something shifted. The smallest adjustment, the most careful repositioning, that told Kale that Pruitt had known this moment was coming, had planned for it, had a contingency already in motion. Kale's hand went to his phone. The safe house number rang once, twice, 3 times. No answer. The phone rang 4 times. Then 5. Then Kale heard breathing on the line, and the breathing was wrong. Too shallow. Too fast. The specific rhythm of someone who was trying very hard to sound like nothing was happening while something was very much happening. Nearest. He kept his voice flat, controlled. Where is Caius? A pause. Half a second too long. He's here, she said. He's right here. Kale turned away from Pruitt and his men without another word and walked to the corner of the building. Riven tracked the move and without being told stepped into the space Kale had vacated. Close enough to Pruitt that leaving was no longer a casual option for anyone in the room. Tell me what's in the room with you, Kale said into the phone. Another pause. Nearest. 2 men, she said quietly. They came in through the east side. They said they were yours. They were not his. He knew every man he had stationed at that safe house. He'd placed them himself. Nobody came through the east side without his direct authorization, and he had not given that authorization to anyone since they left 4 hours ago. Is Caius awake? Kale asked. Yes. Put him on. A rustling sound. Then a small voice. Hello, Caius. Kale kept his voice steady. Easy. The way you talk to a child when you need them calm and you cannot afford to transfer your own urgency. I need you to do something for me. Okay, Kaya said. No hesitation. You remember the blue chair in the second room? The one near the bookshelf. A pause. Yeah. I need you to go sit in it. Right now. Can you do that? Silence for 3 seconds. Then, the men said we shouldn't move around. Kale's jaw tightened. The men are wrong, he said. Go sit in the blue chair. He heard small feet on hardwood. He heard one of the men in the room say something. A word low and sharp. He heard Kaya say very clearly, he told me to sit in the chair. So I'm sitting in the chair. 6 years old. Not afraid of anything. Kale was already moving toward the vehicle. Soren caught the shift in his posture and was 2 steps behind him before Kale said a single word. Safe house, Kale said. That was enough. Draxon appeared in the doorway of the building. His eyes moved to Kale's face and he read it the way brothers read each other. Instantly, without needing the details. What happened? Draxon said. It was not a question. Someone got into the house. Draxon's entire body changed. It was not dramatic. It was not loud. It was the specific, total shift of a man who has spent 7 years in controlled stillness suddenly having a reason to move. I'm coming, he said. You. He is my son, Draxon said. Quiet. Absolute. Kale looked at him for 1 full second. Then, get in the vehicle. Riven stayed behind with 2 men and Pruitt, who was no longer going anywhere, and the follow car repositioned fast. They were on the road in 90 seconds. 41 minutes back. Kale spent them on the phone. He reached his head of safe house security, a man named Tobias Wren, who had been with the syndicate for 14 years and who Kale trusted with the specific, limited trust you extend to someone whose reliability you have tested in actual fire, and what Tobias told him landed like weight. The east side entry had been clean. No forced entry. No alarm trigger. No physical breach. Someone had used a code. A real code. Current code. Not a stolen one. The system would have flagged a stolen credential. A legitimate, active access code assigned to someone inside the syndicate's own safe house authorization list. Kale stared at the road. Inside the infrastructure. Draxon had said it in the building. Pruitt had built his network from the inside, not through force but through access. Slow, patient, layered access. The kind that doesn't show up in an audit until you're already past the point where audits matter. Someone on Kale's own authorization list had given Pruitt's men the door code. That matters. It means the problem is not contained. It means there are more names on the list they don't have yet. Draxon was in the back seat, not speaking, watching the road with the focus of a man counting seconds. His hands were on his knees, still. But the stillness was different from the kind Kale had seen in him in the building, that had been controlled patience. This was controlled force. The kind of stillness that comes right before something gives way. He's going to be fine, Soren said from the other side of the back seat. Draxon looked at him. You don't know that. No, Soren said evenly. But the boy told a room full of syndicate enforcers to back down using nothing but a pointed finger and his father's voice. I don't think 2 men with a door code are going to rattle him. Something moved across Draxon's face. He didn't smile. Not exactly. But something in him eased just a fraction, and he turned back to the window. 20 minutes out, Kale's phone lit up. Tobias. The 2 men made contact with the boy and the guardian and then held position, Tobias said. They didn't make a move toward either of them. They're standing in the main room. Holding, Kale said. Like they're waiting for something. Kale looked at the road. They weren't sent to take Caius. Not yet. They were sent to confirm he was there. To hold the position until whoever directed them got a signal. Until the larger operation was ready to move. This was not a kidnapping attempt. This was a flag. A message. We know where the boy is. We can reach him whenever we want. Move against us and find out what happens next. Kale's hand tightened around the phone. He thought about Pruitt's face in that concrete building. The way it had gone white when Draxon walked through the door. The way the mask had slipped, just for a second, before snapping back into place. Pruitt had said, "This isn't over." He hadn't been making a threat. He'd been stating a fact. Because Pruitt was not the top of this. Cale had known that for about 20 minutes now, sitting in the back of his own understanding, too busy managing the immediate situation to fully examine it. But it was there, clear. Pruitt was infrastructure. He was access. He was the inside man. But someone above him had built the original priority sequence. Someone who had been operational long enough to put Vasil Dravik's name at the top of a list and then watch it get executed and then sit through the grief of three brothers for 9 years without flinching. That was not Pruitt. Pruitt didn't have the patience for it. Didn't have the reach. Cale's phone buzzed again. Devra Osei. "I found the second layer," she said. No preamble. Devra never used preamble. "The shell company financial trail you cracked. It goes 3 layers deep, like Soren said. But there's a 4th layer. Buried. It requires access to a server archive that hasn't been touched in 9 years. You touched it," Cale said. "I did," she said. "And what I found underneath the 4th layer is a name that is going to change the shape of everything you think you know about the last decade." The vehicle turned onto the safe house road. Gravel under tires. Tree line thickening. The lights of the building visible through the dark. "Tell me," Cale said. Devra told him. And Cale sat with it for 3 full seconds. An eternity for him before he said anything. "Are you certain?" he said. "The financial records are clean," Devra said. "The transfer chain is documented. The signature on the original priority sequence matches the same signature on documents I pulled from the council's own archive." A pause. "It's not Pruitt's name, Cale. It never was." The vehicle stopped. The safe house was 20 feet away. Through the window of the main room, Cale could see the 2 men, standing exactly as Tobias had described, holding, waiting. And in the blue chair by the bookshelf, visible through the glass, a small figure with a navy blue hoodie and shoes still on his feet, sitting straight-backed and completely still, watching the door like he was waiting for someone specific to come through it. Caius. Draxon saw him through the window. He made a sound. Low. Involuntary. The sound of 7 years of distance collapsing into a single point. He was out of the vehicle before it fully stopped. Cale grabbed his arm. "Not yet," Cale said. "Not until we control the room." Draxon looked at him with eyes that were very close to the edge of something. "1 minute," Cale said. "Give me 1 minute." Draxon stopped. Cale got out of the vehicle and walked toward the safe house door. And somewhere behind him, Devra's voice was still in his earpiece, saying the name that had moved underneath everything for a decade. A name Cale knew. A name that sat on the council. A name that had voted on Draxon's death declaration. The door opened. The 2 men in the main room were professionals. Cale could tell that in the first 3 seconds. They didn't reach for weapons when he walked in. Didn't shift into a defensive posture. They stood where they were, controlled, measured, the specific stillness of people who have been told to hold and are holding because they understand the larger picture they're operating inside of. That was almost worse than aggression. Aggression was readable. This was a message in human form. Cale looked at them. They looked back. Then he looked at Caius. The boy was still in the blue chair. His posture had not changed. Straight-backed, watchful, shoes on the floor. He looked at Cale when Cale looked at him, and something in his face shifted. Not relief exactly. More like confirmation. Like he'd been waiting for a specific person to walk through that door, and had decided some time ago he wasn't moving until that person arrived. "You took your time," Caius said. Cale looked at him for 1 second. "Get up," he said. "Come here." Caius got up and walked across the room without looking at the 2 men. He stopped in front of Cale and looked up at him. "Those men aren't yours," Caius said. "No. I knew that," Kaya said. Their smell was wrong. Kale put one hand on the boy's shoulder and turned to Nearest. She was standing near the kitchen doorway. Her arms were crossed tight over her chest. Not hostile, holding. She had the look of someone who had been managing fear for the last 2 hours by reducing it to a series of small, practical tasks and had run out of tasks. Are you hurt? Kale asked her. She shook her head. They just stood there, she said. They didn't touch anything. They just stood there and watched us. I know what they were doing, Kale said. He turned to the two men. Who sent you? He said. The taller of the two. Broad shoulders, calm eyes, the kind of face that had made a decision long before this room. Looked at Kale without expression. We're not going to answer that, the man said. That's fine, Kale said. I already know. That landed. Not visibly. Not dramatically. But it landed, the slight adjustment in the taller man's posture, the fraction of recalculation behind his eyes. He'd expected the question to be a genuine ask. He hadn't expected it to be confirmation. Kale looked at his enforcer beside the door. A man named Drez, who had been with the syndicate since before Kale had authority to hire anyone, and nodded once. Drez moved. The two men were contained in under 30 seconds. Professional, clean, no one hurt. They didn't resist, which was itself information. They'd been told to go quietly if it came to that. They'd been told their job was presence, not combat, which meant their employer understood the current balance of power well enough to know that sending fighters would end badly. But sending messengers, that was different. Messengers cost nothing and said everything. The door behind Kale opened. Draxon walked in. He stood in the doorway and looked at the room. At Nearest, at the two restrained men, at the blue chair, and then at his son, standing beside Kale with his hands at his sides and his chin up. Caius looked at the man in the doorway. He looked for a long time. His face changed. Not all at once. The way a room changes when light comes through a window that's been closed too long. Slowly, then completely. He looked at Draxon's jaw, and then his eyes, and then the mark on his chest visible above the collar of his shirt. Nearest, Caius said. His voice was very quiet. Nearest, that's the picture. Nearest made a sound. She pressed her hand over her mouth. Draxon crossed the room in 4 steps and dropped to his knees in front of his son. He didn't say anything right away. He just looked at him. 7 years of looking compressed into a few seconds. The jaw he'd given him, the eyes that were the boy's mother's and no one else's, the particular way Caius held his own weight, feet planted like he'd decided the ground was his and that was final. Hey, Draxon said. His voice came out lower than he'd intended. Rougher. Caius stared at him. Are you my dad? Caius asked. Draxon's throat moved. Yeah, he said. I am. Caius's face did not break. He didn't cry. He didn't fling himself forward the way children in movies do. He reached out and pressed 2 fingers to Draxon's chest. Right side, left side, the exact placement of the mark. Then he nodded once, very serious, like he was completing a verification process. Okay, he said. And then he stepped forward and leaned against his father's chest, and Draxon's arms came up around him, and neither of them moved for a long time. Nearest was crying quietly near the kitchen door. Kale turned away and walked to the other side of the room. He stood at the window and looked out at the tree line and gave them the only thing he could offer right now, which was space. Soren appeared beside him. Devra's name, Soren said quietly. You need to brief me. I know. Now, Kale. Kale looked at the tree line. Councilman Bertrand Okafor, he said. Soren went very still. Bertrand Okafor. 17-year council member. Former syndicate legal architect. The man who had personally written the framework for Draxon's death declaration. The man who had sat on the succession audit committee 2 years ago when Riven had pulled the file and confirmed the closure. The man who had been sitting inside the problem the entire time. Not Pruitt. Pruitt was the instrument. Okafor was the hand. He's on the council right now, Soren said. He has access to every safe house authorization list, every security code, every operational asset in the Eastern infrastructure. Yes, Kale said. He could have moved against us at any point in the last 9 years. Yes, Soren thought for a moment. Why didn't he? That was the right question. Kale had been sitting with it since Devra said the name, turning it over, examining its edges, looking for what was underneath. Because we weren't a threat while Draxen was underground and Caius was hidden, Kale said. The bloodline was suppressed. The air was invisible. There was nothing to move against. He paused. But the moment the boy surfaced, the moment blood recognized blood and Caius pointed at my mark in that diner, the entire equation changed. We became a threat, Soren said. We became the thing he spent 9 years making sure never happened. Soren was quiet for a moment. He'll move fast, Soren said. He's already moving, Kale said. He tilted his head toward the 2 restrained men on the other side of the room. Those 2 weren't a coincidence. He knew about the storage unit ping before Devra flagged it. He's got monitoring we haven't found yet. Then we have a window, Soren said. Small one. How small? Hours, Soren said. Not days. Kale turned from the window. Across the room, Draxen was still on his knees with Caius. The boy had pulled back slightly and was saying something. Kale couldn't hear what, and Draxen was listening with his full attention, the specific focus of a man who understands he is owed nothing and is receiving everything. Neris had lowered her hand from her mouth and was watching them with the expression of someone who has been carrying a weight for so long they've stopped noticing it until the moment someone takes it off them. Kale walked back across the room and crouched down to Caius's level. Draxen looked at him. Kale looked back. An entire conversation passed between them in the 3 seconds before either spoke. The kind of conversation that doesn't need words because brothers who have fought together and buried each other and carried each other's weight across 7 years of dark don't need them. We need to move everyone, Kale said. All of us. Secondary location. Draxen nodded. What's the play? Draxen asked. We take it to the council, Kale said. We take everything. The file, the financial trail, the photograph, Devra's documentation. We walk in with the 4th bloodline standing and the full evidentiary record, and we put Bertrand Okafor in front of every council member he's ever manipulated. Draxen looked at him. That's a room full of people he's had access to for 17 years, Draxen said. You don't know how many of them are his. No, Kale said. But he doesn't know how much we have. A beat. And he doesn't know you're alive, Kale said. Not yet. Not officially. Draxen's expression shifted. You want to walk me into that room, he said. I want to walk all of us into that room, Kale said. For Dravik bloodlines. The air. The documentation. Everything at once. In the one space where he can't quietly make it disappear. Caius was listening to all of this with the focused attention he applied to everything. Can I come? Caius asked. Both men looked at him. No, Draxen said. But, no, Draxen said again. Gentle this time. Absolute. Caius looked at Kale. Kale looked at Draxen. He said nothing. But Draxen read it anyway, the slight shift in Kale's expression that said the boy had already changed the shape of the situation twice by simply existing in it, and underestimating him a 3rd time might not be the play. Draxen looked at his son. Then he looked at the door. We'll see, he said. And that was not a no. But what Kale didn't say, what he kept in the part of himself where the operational calculations lived, was that they had something else. Something Devra had found in the final layer of the archive that he hadn't yet shared with Soren or Draxen. A name. A second name. On the original priority sequence. Below Vasil Dravik. Below Draxen. Below Caius. 4th on the list. Kale's own name. He had been on Okafor's list for 9 years and hadn't known it, which meant this had never been only about Draxon. It had always been about all of them. They moved at noon, not because noon was safer than any other hour. There was no safe hour anymore. Kale understood that clearly now. But noon meant the council building would be in full session. Every member present. Staff in the corridors. The specific, witnessed chaos of institutional activity that made quiet disposal of inconvenient information nearly impossible. You couldn't erase a truth that walked through a crowded room. That was the play. 3 vehicles. Different routes. They converged 2 blocks from the council building on a side street that Soren had swept personally 40 minutes prior. Devra was already inside. She'd gone in at 9 under normal pretense, cleared her access 2 hours ago, and had spent the time since mapping Okafor's movements with the patience of someone who has spent 32 years learning how institutions breathe. She radioed at 12:04. He's in the East Chamber. Full session opens in 11 minutes. He's seated. His 3 staff members are positioned in the corridor, the ones I flagged yesterday. Armed? Riven asked. Discreetly, Devra said. But yes. Riven looked at Kale. Kale nodded. They were going in. The 4 of them, Kale, Riven, Soren, Draxon, stood on the sidewalk outside the vehicle for exactly 3 seconds before moving. Nobody spoke. There was nothing that needed saying. 9 years. For brothers. One chance to do this in the open where it couldn't be buried again. They walked into the council building like they owned it. Because they did. The Dravik name had been part of syndicate governance before most of the people in that building were born. Whatever Okafor had done to the architecture of the institution, however many years of access and manipulation and quiet removal, he had not changed that foundation. He had built on top of it and hoped nobody looked underneath. They were looking now. The receptionist at the main desk looked up when they entered. Looked at Kale. Then at the man beside him. Then looked again. Draxon. She had been with the council for 11 years. She had attended his memorial. Her face went through 5 distinct expressions in 2 seconds and then settled into something that was trying very hard to be professional. Mr. Dravik, she said, to Kale, because she needed a target and he was the one she recognized as functional. Full session, Kale said. We're going in. The session is all ready. I know when it started, Kale said. He kept walking. The East Chamber was 2 corridors and a set of double doors away. The corridors were exactly as Devra had described. Staff positioned at the secondary junctions, Okafor's people, dressed like everyone else, standing with the careful nonchalance of people who have been told to watch for something specific. They saw the 4 brothers coming and the nonchalance stopped. One of them reached for an earpiece. Riven was already next to him. Don't, Riven said pleasantly. The man did not. The double doors to the East Chamber opened from the inside as they reached them. Devra, who had been watching from the internal camera feed on her phone, had unlocked the magnetic seal remotely. They walked in. The council chamber was exactly what it always was. A long oval table, 12 seats, 12 faces, the particular atmosphere of concentrated institutional power that took decades to build and could be used for anything its occupants decided. 12 members in session. Documents, tablets, water glasses, and at the far left of the table Bertrand Okafor, 71 years old, gray at the temples, a face that wore authority the way some people wear a well-fitted coat, naturally, without effort, as though it had been tailored to him. He looked up when the doors opened. He saw Kale, then Riven, then Soren, then Draxon. His water glass stopped halfway to his mouth. The chamber went quiet. Not the performative quiet of a meeting being interrupted, the specific, total quiet of a room where every person present has just understood that something is happening and that what they thought they knew is insufficient. Councilman Tessa Bright. The chair, a woman of 60 with reading glasses and the specific impatience of someone whose time had been interrupted mid-sentence, looked at the 4 men in the doorway. "This session is closed," she said. "It was," Kale said. "It isn't anymore." He walked to the center of the table. He set down 3 things in sequence: the file, the photograph, Devra's documentation printed and organized, the financial trail laid out in a sequence a 10-year-old could follow. Then he stepped back. "Bertrand Okafor has held a council seat for 17 years, Kale said. "In that time, he has used that access to build a counter-operation inside the syndicate's own infrastructure. The goal was the removal of bloodlines that could not be bought or controlled." He looked at Okafor. "Starting with my father." The chamber was extremely still. Okafor had not moved. His face was doing nothing. After 17 years, he was very good at that. But his hands, flat on the table, still, were doing something his face was trying not to. They were holding the specific tension of someone who has run the numbers in real time and is waiting to see whether the number comes up in their favor. "The documentation in front of you," Kale continued, "includes a 9-year financial trail, a priority sequence document bearing Councilman Okafor's verified signature, surveillance evidence placing his operative in restricted syndicate space, and the records of 2 men who entered a Dravik safe house this morning using access codes obtained through his authorization." Tessa Bright had put her reading glasses on and was already looking at the top document. 2 other council members had reached for the file simultaneously. Okafor spoke. "This is an extraordinary claim," he said. His voice was exactly what it always was: measured, confident, the voice of someone who had been in rooms like this their entire career and had always found a way through. Based, apparently, on documentation assembled in, the last 12 hours, by parties with an obvious personal interest in the outcome. 17 months, Draxon said. The room shifted. Okafor looked at Draxon. For the first time since they walked in, for the first time in 7 years, Bertrand Okafor looked at Draxon Vale and had nothing. No script. No practiced response. Nothing in his 17 years of council experience had prepared him for this exact variable. "The 4th Dravik bloodline has been building this case for 17 months, Draxon said. He walked to the table. "From a location 40 minutes from this building. I have been watching, recording, documenting." He set a drive on the table, small, flat, the kind that held years of organized information. Everything is on there: dates, communications intercepts, financial movements, the full operational record of what Councilman Okafor has been running inside this institution. Tessa Bright looked from Draxon to Okafor and back. "You are Draxon Dravikvale," she said. "Not a question. Recognition." "Yes," Draxon said. "You were declared deceased by this council 7 years ago." "I know," Draxon said. "Councilman Okafor signed that declaration." Another specific quiet fell over the room. Okafor's hands on the table were no longer still. Tessa Bright looked at him. "Bertrand," she said. Just his name. But the weight she put on it said everything about what she was beginning to understand. Okafor stood. He was a man who had spent 17 years knowing when to move and how to move and what moving looked like when you had more information than the people around you. He pushed back his chair and stood and straightened his jacket, and for a moment he looked exactly like what he'd always presented himself as. A man of institutional gravity, operating within the bounds of his authority. Then he looked at the 4 brothers standing across the table from him. And he looked at the drive. And he sat back down. It was not a surrender. It was a calculation. He was not done. Kale understood that with absolute clarity. A man who had built 17 years of layered infrastructure did not fold on a single morning's evidence, no matter how clean it was. There would be legal challenges. There would be disputes about chain of custody and verification and the credibility of parties with personal stakes. This was not over. But the room had shifted. That was what mattered right now. Every person at that table had seen Draxon Vale standing alive in front of them. Every person had seen four Dravik brothers walk into a closed session carrying documentation that would take weeks to fully unpack. Every person had watched Bertrand Okafor's face when Draxen spoke. The room had shifted, and rooms that shift tend to keep moving. Kale's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. One word from Tobias at the safe house. Problem. Kale looked at Riven. Riven had already seen it. He was watching Kale's face the way he always watched, reading everything. Kale looked at Soren. Soren tilted his head, barely, toward the door. They could not leave. Not now. Not with Okafor still in the room and the council still in the middle of processing everything they'd just been handed. Leaving now would look like retreat, and retreat in a room like this was its own kind of loss. But the safe house, Caius, Nearest. Tobias didn't send one-word messages unless one word was all there was time for. Kale looked at Draxen. Draxen's phone was already in his hand. He'd gotten the same message from a different number, an alert he'd set up himself, linked to the safe house's secondary monitoring system that nobody on Kale's team even knew existed. The two brothers looked at each other across the oval table. One of them needed to stay. One of them needed to go. And they both understood, without saying it, which was which. Draxen drove. He drove the way Kale moved through rooms, like the road was something that had agreed to get out of his way. Soren was in the passenger seat running communications, and the follow car was 60 seconds behind them, but Draxen wasn't thinking about the follow car. He was thinking about his son. Tobias had sent a second message by the time they hit the highway. 2 words this time. Second team. A second unit had approached the safe house property. Not through the main entrance. Through the tree line, northeast side. Tobias had spotted them on the perimeter cameras. 4 men, moving in staggered formation, professional spacing. This was not a repeat of the morning's messengers. This was a removal team. Okafor had gotten the signal from his people inside the council building faster than Kale had anticipated. Maybe a secondary contact in the room. Maybe a monitoring feed. Either way, the sequence was clear. The moment Okafor understood that Draxen was alive and the evidence was in council hands, he had triggered the contingency. Remove the air. Remove the proof that the bloodline continued. Because without Caius, without the living evidence of Draxen's existence as more than a ghost story, the documentation was significant but manageable. Documents could be challenged. That was the variable Okafor needed gone. Draxen's hands were steady on the wheel. That steadiness cost him something. Soren could see it, the controlled expenditure of everything that wanted to break the surface, but it held. 20 minutes out. Soren was on the phone with Tobias. 4 men in the northeast tree line, Tobias said. They've stopped at the outer perimeter. They're not moving yet. I think they're waiting for a signal. From inside, Soren said. Or for confirmation that their secondary, the council contact, has gone dark. If they lose contact with whoever is feeding them updates, they might move early. Soren looked at Draxen. Okafor is contained in that chamber, Soren said. His people inside the building are being managed by Riven and Devra. His communication lines are almost certainly being monitored. So his team in the tree line stops getting updates, Draxen said. And then they make a decision about what that silence means, Soren said. Draxen pressed the accelerator. 15 minutes. Inside the safe house, Caius was not asleep. He hadn't been since Tobias had quietly repositioned the 2 remaining interior guards and asked Nearest to move with the boy to the innermost room, the one with no exterior windows and the secondary locked door. Nearest had done it without argument, which told Kale's people everything they needed to know about how long she'd been preparing for exactly this kind of moment. She had the blue tin open on her lap when Tobias checked on them. The photograph of Draxen was in her hands. Caius was sitting beside her with his back against the wall, and he was looking at the ceiling with the particular expression he wore when he was thinking through something complicated. Tobias, Caius said, without looking away from the ceiling. Tobias stopped in the doorway. Yeah, bud. The men outside, Kaya said. They're not going to come in unless something goes quiet that's supposed to be noisy. Tobias stared at him. How do you know that? Tobias said. Caius looked at him. Because that's how my dad taught Nearest to set up the alerts, Caius said. If the phone stops updating, that's the signal. So as long as somebody keeps sending updates, they wait. Tobias blinked. Then he pulled out his phone and started typing. Not to Soren. To the number Draxon had given him 17 months ago, the dead drop line that nobody else on Kale's team had. He typed a location update. Simple. Formatted like a routine check-in. Sent it. If Okafor's treeline team was monitoring for signal continuity from their inside contact, a routine check-in format might buy time. It wasn't a guarantee. But Caius Vale had just bought them a window with a piece of operational logic a 6-year-old had no business knowing. The boy went back to looking at the ceiling. Draxon pulled onto the safe house road. 6 minutes had passed since Tobias's second message. The tree line northeast of the property was dark and still in the midday gray, the kind of stillness that was not absence but pressure. Draxon clocked it immediately when he stepped out of the vehicle. He looked at Soren. Soren had his phone to his ear. Tobias bought a few minutes, Soren said. The team outside is still holding. Draxon moved toward the building. The interior guard at the door, Briggs, who Draxon had met twice and trusted on the basis of Kale's word, which was sufficient, held up a hand. They're in the back room, Briggs said. Both of them. Safe. Draxon exhaled once. Then went in. The back room was exactly what Tobias had described. Interior, no windows, secondary lock. Draxon used the code Kale had given him that morning. The door opened. Nearest looked up first. She stood immediately, the photograph still in her hand, and looked at Draxon with an expression that moved through 3 things too fast to name. Caius was on his feet before Draxon was fully in the room. He crossed the distance between them at a speed that had nothing measured about it and hit his father around the middle with the full force of a small person who had been sitting very still for a very long time. Draxon caught him. He pressed his face against the top of his son's head and said nothing for a moment. Then, "I've got you." Simple as that. "I know," Caius said, muffled. "I knew you were coming." Draxon held him. Then, over the boy's head, he looked at Nearest. She was still holding the photograph. Still standing in exactly the same spot, because moving would have required a decision she hadn't made yet. Draxon reached out one hand. She took 3 steps and took his hand, and he held it, and she looked at him with 7 years' worth of everything that didn't fit into the shape of a normal expression. "You owe me enormously," she said. "I know," Draxon said. "I'm very angry with you. I know that too. You left a map in my care. You left a child in my care. You left an envelope in my care. For 7 years. Yes. I kept them all," she said. "Obviously." "I know," Draxon said. "I was watching." She pressed her free hand briefly over her eyes. Outside, a sound. The northeast tree line. Movement. Soren's voice came through the door. Controlled. Immediate. "They're moving. Time is up." Draxon set Caius back on his feet. He looked at his son's face. "Stay in this room," he said. "Door locked. Don't open it for anyone except your voice or Kale's voice or Soren's voice or Riven's voice," Caius said. "I know." Draxon looked at him. "How do you know that?" Caius looked back at him with those ancient, patient eyes. "Because that's what you would say," Caius said. "And I've been thinking about what you would say for my whole life." Draxon stood. He locked the door behind him. And then he walked toward the sound of movement in the tree line, and for the first time in 7 years he was not running from anything. He was walking toward it, with his brothers on either side. The 4 Dravik men, finally, again completely 4, moved into the gray midday light of the safe house perimeter, and the tree line ahead of them went very still for a moment. Then the first of Okafor's team stepped out. He stopped when he saw 4 of them. He'd been told to expect 2. Maybe 3 on a good day. Not 4. Not the 4th man whose face he'd only seen in a memorial photograph 7 years past. He stopped, and the calculation behind his eyes was visible. Running the numbers, finding the answer, arriving at the conclusion that the numbers no longer worked the way his employer had promised. Draxen looked at him. "Go back," Draxen said. "Tell whoever sent you what you found." The man looked at the 4 of them. Then he went back into the tree line. And he kept going. The others followed. No shots, no confrontation, just the sound of 4 men retreating through dry leaves. And then silence. Soren exhaled. Riven, who had arrived from the council building 8 minutes after Draxen without being asked because he always came, looked at the space where the team had been. "That's not the end of it," Riven said. "No," Kale said, on the phone from the council chamber, his voice coming through all 3 of their earpieces simultaneously. "But it's what today is." The tree line was empty. The safe house was secure. And inside the locked back room, a boy with a navy blue hoodie and an old photograph in his guardian's hands pressed his ear to the door and listened to the silence outside it. He heard his father's voice, and he sat back down on the floor. And for the first time in his entire short life, he felt something settle in his chest that he didn't have a name for yet. He would learn the name later. It was safety. Real safety. Not the kind you build out of quiet and small apartments and careful exits. The kind that comes from people. The kind you don't have to earn. 3 weeks later, the council chamber was different. Not the room itself. The table was the same oval, the seats the same 12 positions, the water glasses in the same place they always were. But the weight of the room had changed. The specific gravity of who sat in each chair and what they carried with them had been redistributed. And everyone present could feel it even if they wouldn't have said so aloud. Bertrand Okafor was not at the table. His seat was empty. The formal suspension had come 6 days after the brothers walked in. The council had voted 8-3. For abstentions from members whose connections to Okafor were still being investigated, 3 votes from members whose connection was apparently beyond investigation at that point, and 8 from people who had looked at the documentation and decided they were not interested in being on the wrong side of a tide that was clearly turning. 8 was enough. Okafor had been escorted from the building with the particular dignity that institutions extend to the powerful when removing them. Quietly, procedurally, with all the visible courtesy that masks the irreversibility of what's happening underneath. His people inside the infrastructure were being identified one by one. It would take months. It might take longer. There were layers Devra hadn't reached yet. Threads that would require patience and precision and the kind of institutional memory that didn't expire. But the architecture had been exposed. And exposed structures don't hold the same way. Kale sat at the head of the table for the first time. Not because he had demanded it. Because Tessa Bright had offered it, 3 days after the confrontation, in a conversation that was brief and direct in the way that Kale respected. She had looked at him across a smaller table in a smaller room and said, "The council needs a functioning northern axis. Your family's authority over the eastern infrastructure has never been formally contested by this body. It was undermined through manipulation, not vote. If you are willing to formalize what was always structurally true, the path is there." He had thought about it for 1 day. Then he had said yes. Draxen was not at the table today. Not because he wasn't invited. Because he and Kale had agreed, quietly, in the kitchen of the safe house at 6 in the morning with coffee that was slightly too strong, that the council chamber was not the right first public step for the 4th Bloodline's reintegration. The documentation had established that Draxen was alive. The legal process of reversing the death declaration was underway. The succession questions around Caius would be navigated through proper channels, with proper representation, without putting a 7-year-old in front of an institution that had signed his father's false death certificate. One step at a time. That had been Draxon's phrase. Kale had not expected Draxon to be the patient one. But 7 years of calculated waiting had apparently rewired something in his brother's relationship with time. The session was routine. Infrastructure reports. Security assessments. A procedural motion about the Eastern border agreements that had been delayed for 3 quarters, while the internal investigation consumed institutional bandwidth. Kale moved through it with the efficiency he applied to everything, and by the time the session wrapped, 2 hours had passed and the building felt slightly less like it was holding its breath. He drove back to the safe house. Not because it was his permanent location, it wasn't. The formal Dravik residence was in the city, and they would all return to it in stages once the security transition was complete. But the safe house was where the family was right now, and family was currently the priority in a way that Kale was still getting used to. Adjusting to it consciously, deliberately. The way you adjust to something that was missing so long you'd restructured everything around the absence and now had to restructure it again around the presence. He pulled up on the gravel at 4:11 in the afternoon. The front door was open. That was new. Safe house protocol had been closed doors, controlled entries, nothing casual about the perimeter. But the gravel lot was quiet, the light was good, and when Kale walked up the path and looked through the open door, he understood. The main room. Riven at the kitchen table with a tablet. Working, but present. The specific posture of a man who is doing something productive while also keeping half his attention on the room because the room contains things worth keeping attention on. Soren in the armchair near the window. Book open. A real book, which meant he had decided the ambient monitoring was sufficient and that he was allowed to be a person for 45 minutes. Nearest at the other end of the kitchen table. Also working, a laptop, something that appeared to be logistical, the kind of administrative reconstruction that came with a life being rebuilt from scratch. She looked up when Kale came in and nodded once, which was the nearest version of an extensive greeting. Draxon. On the floor. Specifically on the floor of the main room, cross-legged, with Caius directly across from him, a chessboard between them. An actual chessboard, physical pieces, not digital, that Soren had produced from somewhere in the safe house's supplies. Draxon was frowning at the board with the expression of a man who was losing to a child and was not entirely sure how it had happened. Caius was not frowning. Caius was considering his next move with the patient, thorough attention he brought to everything, turning a bishop between his fingers. Kale stopped in the doorway. Riven glanced up at him, then at the chess game, then back at his tablet. He's been losing for 40 minutes, Riven said, not quietly. I am not losing, Draxon said. I am strategically repositioning. You have 1 rook and a knight, Soren said from the armchair, without looking up from his book. That's a comeback, Draxon said. Caius placed his bishop. Check, Caius said. Draxon stared at the board. Kale walked into the room and set his jacket on the back of the chair nearest the door and looked at the board over Draxon's shoulder. Draxon was, in fact, losing. You taught him this? Kale asked. Nearest taught him, Draxon said. Apparently she is also exceptional at chess, which is information I should have had before I agreed to play. Nearest did not look up from her laptop. You have 3 moves before he takes your king, she said. Thank you, Nearest. 2, actually. I miscounted. Draxon looked at the board. Then he looked at his son. Caius was waiting, patient, not gloating, not even close to gloating, just waiting with the courtesy of someone who understood that winning was more interesting when the other person had time to find their own conclusion. Draxon tipped his king. Caius looked at the fallen piece. Then he looked up at his father. Something in the look, something in the complete, simple ease of it, the way his eyes went to Draxon's face, the way eyes go to something they've decided is permanent, made Kale turn away for a moment and look out the window. Because there was something about watching a thing you were afraid was gone come back whole. Not just alive but actually whole, present, real in the specific way that matters, that required a moment to process without an audience. He gave himself that moment. Then Caius's voice, rematch, and Draxon's voice, set it up, and the sound of pieces being repositioned on a board. Kale turned back. He pulled a chair from the table and set it a few feet from the board. Not in the game, not directing anything, just present, and sat down. Caius glanced at him. You can play the winner, Caius said seriously. I'll consider it, Kale said. This was not a formal arrangement. No decree had been signed. No succession document was filed. No council vote had confirmed anything about the Dravic bloodline's reintegration or Caius's position within it. Those things were coming. Soren had a timeline. Devra had a legal strategy. The process was moving with the careful deliberateness that sustainable institutional change required. But this room, right now, was not about process. This room was about the thing that came before process. The thing that made process worth doing. Kale looked at his brothers. Riven with his tablet, Soren with his book, Draxon resetting chess pieces with his son, and felt something that he would not have had a name for 12 days ago. He had a name for it now. The same name Caius had found in the back room of a safe house when he heard his father's voice and felt something settle in his chest that had never been settled before. 3 weeks ago, a boy had stood on a red vinyl booth in a roadside diner and pointed at the mark on a stranger's chest and said his father had one just like it. And the world had rearranged itself around that single point of contact. Blood calling to blood. Truth surfacing the way it always does eventually, not because the people keeping it buried get tired, but because the thing being buried is alive and alive things have a way of finding light. Kale looked at Caius. The boy was focused on the board again. Planning. Already 3 moves ahead, probably in that particular way of his. He looked like Draxon. He looked like all of them, in the bones, in the set of the jaw, in the way he held himself like the ground was his and that was final. He was Dravic. Completely. Undeniably. Regardless of what any piece of paper said or would say. And outside, the syndicate was reconfiguring around a truth it hadn't been allowed to acknowledge. The council was processing a documentation file that would take weeks to fully examine. Okafor's remaining infrastructure was being dismantled one connection at a time. Devra was 3 layers into a 4th thread that nobody had found yet. The work was not done. It would not be done for a long time. But today, in this room, the work that mattered most had already been finished. The family was whole. That was not the ending. That was the beginning of everything that came next. And what came next, the rebuilding, the reckoning, the full accounting of 9 years of buried truth, was going to change the shape of everything the syndicate thought it understood about power and bloodlines and the particular stubbornness of people who refused to stay gone. Caius looked up from the board and met Kale's eyes. Your turn, Caius said. Kale reached for a chair and pulled it closer. If the story moved you, if you felt what it means to fight for family, to refuse to stay buried, to hold on even when everything says let go, then this channel is where you belong. Hit subscribe right now and turn on the notification bell. Every week, we bring you stories that go deeper than drama. Stories about loyalty, about truth that survives the people trying to erase it, about children who carry their parents' courage without knowing it. Drop a comment below and tell us, which character hit you hardest? Was it Caius, who never learned to be afraid? Draxon, who chose invisibility to protect what mattered most? Or Kale, who had to decide in a split second whether to claim a child who could start a war? Your thoughts don't just feed the algorithm. They inspire the next person who reads them. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it, and we will see you in the next one.